Thanks, everyone. Welcome. Let's start with a quick raise of hands for anyone that is using AI in their day-to-day work as part of the real estate process. Almost everyone. How many of you have developed something a bit more customized, like an agent or an agent skill to do this particular type of work yet? Much fewer. Yay. So about 2 to 3 people have done something more custom. Everyone is using AI and finding value from it. Part of this talk is going to be discussing how do you bridge that gap between using a general purpose AI like GPT, Claude, or Gemini that is really helpful at giving you advice on something or analyzing some quick document to effectively teaching these models how to actually do your work end to end. So when you show up at the office in the morning, most of that work that you find most tedious is already done for you. And this is a process that I think changes the way we think about running our company from something where we see AI as an assistant that is helping us at the very disparate points of the work to an actual coworker that you can delegate the parts of your job that generally you hate the most or that take the most amount of time. We're going to get sometimes a little bit technical, but I'll try not to go too far into it. And hopefully this will give you an illustration to how other real estate companies today are turning models like Gemini, Claude, GPT, and others into fully fledged coworkers that take over a function and they're able to complete 99% of a particular workflow end to end. Specifically, I started V7 to tackle workflows that take 1 to 10 hours to complete. So not your typical, hey, what happens if I add 2 rooms to this apartment? How much does the revenue change? But rather something like, let's review this investment end to end. Here's all the guidelines that we have in how we review an investment. Score it for us as if you were an analyst from my company. This is obviously not a prompt you can use for this type of work. You need to give it guidelines. You need to give it tools so that it can query your internal data or sometimes external APIs to fetch that information in. And it starts to get a little bit more technical, but with huge ROI. We see increases in 20x in investment reviews when adopting agents, turning a 5-hour process into something that takes about 15 minutes of human review. I'll warn you that it also takes a little bit more setup. It's very easy to use a GPT model to ask a question. It takes a couple of hours of setup to build a workflow that can do a process end to end, but the rewards are really great. And generally, if you're feeling comfortable today with using an AI model as a coworker of sorts that you're confiding in and asking for advice, it means you're probably ready to take things one step further and work with a platform like V7 or others that helps you have the agent take over a particular workflow that runs in the background, and it can run at very large scale. So no matter how many leases you need to review, they can be handled. No matter how many OMs or rent rolls you need to review, they can be adopted. And so generally, we're here to help AI take over all the tedious document-related tasks that you don't enjoy doing. I use the word document in a fairly broad way. For V7, a document can be obviously a PDF, but it can also be an Excel file with multiple tabs and regular expressions. That's something we put a lot of work into making AI read it really well. All the way to call recordings, which is something that we internally analyze every day to make sure that the product is actually doing the things that customers want. And this layer of intelligence that you're able to create, where agents are able to query every touch point that your company has to the outside world, gives you this overall knowledge of what's happening within the business that can be quite useful, especially as you're in large scale. And so this is a bit of how V7 works. You're able to give it a single file or a bundle of documents, and it's able to spin up multiple agents to take care of them at very large scale, classifying the documents, adding additional properties, in this case, steps of the workflow that it needs to do, and then take care of them at large scale. That last part of the video should not be playing. We work with several great companies, many of them that are at RETCON today. We work with 300 customers around the world, anywhere from some of the world's largest asset managers like Hamilton Lane or large endowment funds like Yale, as well as companies that make significant investments in real estate like Cushman & Wakefield and others. And the reason why they decided to work with us is because we allow them to emulate a human process within their internal company processes. So if you're looking for AI solutions, you're probably starting with a broad model like GPT that can kind of do everything just well enough. But then when you're looking for something that goes one step beyond, you're probably looking at point solutions that sometimes do one thing particularly well, but sometimes that thing that you're doing may evolve over time. And so when you're evaluating software, you should always ask yourself, what will happen if I change this process down the road? What will happen if it increases at scale quite significantly? It's one of the hardest things for startups and software companies to do, is handle whenever that amount of scale has increased by 10x or 100x. And especially if my files increase in complexity, if my workflow increases in complexity, can the software adopt it? And I think it's good to imagine yourself in a future where most of your time is dedicated to talking to people and bringing in more deals, and everything that is middle office and back office is handled primarily by AI. When you start thinking this way, then you can start making these responsible decisions as to, okay, well, let's make sure that we have a solid enough infrastructure, we have the connectors that we need, and we have AI systems that are able to read all of our files. In particular, things that are very important is reading spreadsheets. It's something that AI is quite terrible at doing. If you give an XLSX format file to Gemini, for example, it reads as a list of CSV files, comma-separated values, which are actually terrible to be queried by AI. So companies like V7 write their own parsing language, which all happens in the background, and it's able to understand regular expressions. And if you have like a financial model where the header of a value is above it, but not directly above it, and not at the top of the sheet, and then the index of it is all the way to the left, AI should be able to look up and look to the left and understand these values and then make calculations accordingly. It should effectively look at the file just like a human analyst would. Many other things like at some point, you may want to generate a file on the other side. If you're analyzing a bunch of leases, you might want to create a report on the other end. That report may contain a lot of charts, diagrams, interactive elements. So how can you turn these into things that later you can share with the wider business and standardize over time so they look like they've been made from you? And then there's other things you can do, generate floor plans or analyze particularly tricky figures within your documents. Like an OM usually has a map view. If you ever try to send a map into an AI system, won't always understand it particularly well. There's two ways of using our product in particular. One is through chat views, which are effectively one-off systems. They have a lot of skills within them. Skills are like things that AI can be taught to do that are micro tasks that are part of your business. For example, here's how we research a company. Here's how we do comp review. Here's how we analyze a financial model. And this is for your quick one-off tasks where you're analyzing a document or doing something for the first time. The other is running agent workflows, which are much larger scale tables where every row is a particular document, bundle of documents like a small data room, or a run of the agent. And it completes this work step by step in the background. That can be triggered from any external event, like an email being received in an inbox or something updating in your CRM. And then the output can be a generated file or updating your internal records. So here's a couple of use cases that we tackle often in real estate. The first one is lease abstraction, a task that most folks hate. This is an example of a workflow and all the various categories of components of the lease that this somewhat off-the-shelf workflow creates. This is a list of the actual properties that get analyzed for every individual lease. And you can add, remove them, customize them to your specific needs. There's a very long list to showcase the extensibility of platforms like V7 in being able to adopt any kind of workflow that you have internally. As you develop these flows, you have this almost spreadsheet view that has on the left in white this input column, and then the purple columns are effectively what AI has analyzed. If I were to add some additional leases, they're simply added to the spreadsheet and then an agent runs for each one. As these run, I'm going to showcase what each one of them looks like. So this is an individual report. Everything is cited directly within the document. This prevents any kind of hallucination. So the agent it can only give you an answer if it knows exactly the position on the input documents where that answer comes from. And that's particularly important. All of these steps, all of these extractions or reasoning steps are simple prompts that you can configure in this UI. We either have our own users configure them, or we have our own solutions engineers that assist companies in automating a workflow end-to-end. So generally, if you have an example of your input documents, and what you want the output to be, it's very easy to figure out the meat in the middle and turn that into a repeatable workflow. And these are some examples of the responses that come through. And at the end, what this particular workflow creates is it creates an interactive report for every lease or the overall bundle of leases, which hopefully these are pre-recorded videos because the Wi-Fi is always a bit unreliable. This is an example of an output. You can generate it in a branded way, can be turned into a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation. In this case, it's an interactive web page that you can share externally with all the metrics and figures that you're analyzing after some extensive review. There's a lot more complexity behind it. You can run some of these things in code if you want to be super token efficient or if you want to run things at very large scale, but we won't get to that for the moment. I'm going to skip generating tear sheets in the interest of time. Here's an example of using the Excel analyst skill within V7, which understands Excel files incredibly well. I'm adding a report on a portfolio of hotel properties here and asking a question. What revenue difference can we expect if occupancy rates grows by 5% in one particular property region? And it's going to analyze the spreadsheet that's on the right that fully renders within the view. You can also download it or create a new version of it, like for doing sensitivity analysis and then re-review it in Excel. And the agent runs through it, understands it, and then gives me the response. And afterwards, I can say, okay, let's create an additional tab that allows me to analyze what this will look like, and let me play with the regular expressions, and it's able to write them directly within the file. Another thing that tends to happen more often, less often these days, is that some of your documents are particularly hard to read. Sometimes they contain handwriting. In this case, it's a binarized document that's a little bit ugly and a bit hard to read. And we're still able to understand every single element of it and cite it within your extractions in your workflow. So if it contains even a chart, a diagram, a map, we're able to extract that information and cite it so that if you need to look back and review this, you have the confidence that AI has not hallucinated and has figured it out. If you do have a case that is particularly important, like let's review this OM, let's make an investment decision here, you probably don't want to offload the entire process to AI without a human looking at it. And all of these steps can be human reviewed, also with conditions that the AI decides itself. For example, if a figure is particularly unusual or the calculation doesn't seem to be quite right, AI can flag it for human review, and then a human can be pinged on whatever platform you prefer to go and review it directly. And these are just some examples of like, hey, here's a workflow where we're doing all these extractions, and there's a few elements that need a human to give a second check. And this, again, what you're seeing on the right, these are the various workflow steps that it's taking. So it's like the meat in the middle before it produces your final output, which could be, let's send this information into our system of record, or let's produce a final docx report that we can use. The extensibility is quite high. V7 is also used for underwriting. In this particular case, we have an input that is a spreadsheet, an offer memorandum, and then a rent roll. So this is a bundle of inputs that relate to the same property, and we want to create a finalized output that we'll get to in a second. That is yet another spreadsheet on the other end. That is taking these 3 spreadsheet inputs and then it's composing it either as a template or creating it from scratch if you wish. Generally, templated things are better done at scale because there is consistency, but consistency is built into the product itself so that if you're doing a task 5 times, the output should be broadly similar to the ones of other examples. There's many more things. I have a demo on data room analysis, which is quite long. I have one on legal clauses within leases, so figuring out if a lease is compliant with a particular new law. This one in particular, slightly more technical, but one problem is usually you need to map semantics to your own library of terms, which are just written in plain language. And you want to make sure that AI knows what one word means amongst its potential synonyms. And this is something that you can easily configure so that you don't have to deal with aliases. AI can understand it, and it keeps all this knowledge in memory. Now, what's the ROI on this? We tend to see increases in processing time with speedups from 10x to 20x in some cases. And generally, ROI, if you're doing something 5 times a week, is almost guaranteed with an AI workflow that can tackle this at large scale. So it's generally a good reason for upgrading from just using a standard model, which at the core is what powers the individual prompts here to something that can be turned into a workflow. A few more things on V7 in particular. A lot of AI companies have fairly high churn rates because people try them, and then after a few months they're like, this was a cool demo. I got to show it to my CTO, but it only solves one small problem, and we probably don't want to continue to invest into it. We see the opposite relationship. The churn rate for us is really low. It's in the low single digits. And most companies tend to expand after their first few months of usage. It's about 60% within their first 12 months and 200% afterwards. So we've had some great customers that have put confidence into starting with one workflow, automating it end to end, and then expanding to another and another and another, and then distributing the ability to use these things to their various colleagues or even to external folks that need to access this data somehow. These are some quotes. The names of the companies are not there, but you can assume many of them are customers. Some of them are here, of folks that have spoken to us in the last 2 or 3 weeks or so. And again, this was actually generated using V7 Go. So agent goes into all of our Gong recordings, looks at some interesting snippets, composes them into a list, and then I use a different AI to generate this little video. If you feel excited about trying AI workflows for the first time or the second time in a workflow that you hate doing yourself, these are the 6 that we tend to see more often being the starting point for real estate firms. But you probably have your own way of doing these things, and you need to validate whether we're able to adopt that process really, really accurately. And the best way to do that, if you're here at RETCON at the exhibit booth, near the Modern Pavilion, there's a big orange banner with a giant V7. So if you look for orange, you'll find our team there, and we can discuss whether this particular software is great for you and hopefully help you automate everything in the back office that you generally hate doing or your colleagues hate doing. That is it. There's a QR code to get in touch with us and see the product live and try it on your own documents if you wish. And thank you for coming. I'll open it up to question, and hope you have a great rest of your conference.